Thank you, chat, for welcoming us back. We're taking a short break from the challenge mode. I don't think we're gonna go back and complete it on stream. So we'll start with the biggest negative, since it's on my mind having just done this prior to the review. That expert mode is absolute BS garbage. I think I understood what their intent was. I just don't find the mode fun. So for people that may or may not see it, because again, I'm not even sure if I'll put it on YouTube. Essentially, it gives us little mini challenges, which by themselves don't sound too bad. You know, you got your multi-hits, you do enough damage, you have to get a total, like, trap score. And those by themselves are not terrible. However, the game does not give you traps in order to do it. So you have to craft all the traps needed for all the challenges. And some of them are very, very, very specific. And there's pretty much no way you would have the traps needed at any given time to complete this mode. We've had things like the one we ended up stopping on was a double Cerberus combo, where we just didn't have the right trap to push an enemy a certain distance. And I think this kind of goes into what my overall problem with this game is compared to some of the other Deception games that we played. So for people that haven't seen it in general, I suppose I should back up one step. The whole premise of the game is a puzzle kind of level. So you have a ceiling trap, a wall trap, and a floor trap. And with a combination of those, they're either meant for damage or pinning somebody in place or moving them a certain distance. And you're allowed to get kind of like a tile-based view in order to set traps, view things like room hazards and things like that. The big issue with this compared to the other Deception games that we played is that they really changed around how you create traps. And honestly, having played through it for one ending, I have to say I really don't like what they did, and I'm glad that we don't see that in other trap games. So normally what happens from the Deception series standpoint is you have a couple basic traps, you know, nothing too crazy, like a push wall, just moves them a certain distance, doesn't do big damage. You got your big slow boulder, which is meant for high damage, but it's kind of awkward to combo into. And normally in other games, you have a kind of technology tree. So if you get something like, if you combine, I don't know, let's say fire plus vase, you'll get like lava vase or something like that. It like vaguely makes sense. If you focus on a lot of vault traps, you unlock more sophisticated vault traps. And it kind of had like a progression system. So it generally kind of flowed, like if you improve the boulder, that might be used in part of a trap later. And the way the game balances things is that even if a trap is quote-unquote stronger, it will go through. Let me turn down the music slightly, actually. So the intent behind the balancing of it is that the damage traps tend to be slow and the setup ones tend to be quick. So you can find ways based off the room layout, whether or not you want to use things like the stairs to slope down attacks that you can damage them, etc., etc. The problem in this game is that it doesn't give you base traps, is what I'll call them in this game, in order to set up for good combos. So for people very familiar with the series, there's no spike wall. So that's already strike one, honestly, in my book. Spike wall is my favorite trap. It is a push wall that does okay damage, but more importantly, angles them. So that way, if they're, for example, if they're walking towards the wall and get hit by it, they always end up facing away from it. And because it causes a hard knockdown, it sets up into vase. And in this game, not only do you not get spike wall, it delays things like the vase, and then confusingly, it gives you magnet wall really early in the game, and it's kind of one of the best traps in the game, and there's honestly no reason to not use it over every other trap in the game. That trap alone sets up for so many infinites. Chad has seen me do vase into Hellfire, Hellfire into Iron Ball, all set up on the magnet wall. It is literally inescapable. They tried to do like an infinite prevention system in the game, but it doesn't really work, because you could still do so much damage that they die anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And I think the big issue with it is that instead of going through this approach where you gradually unlock in a story mode and you could choose your playstyle as you go through, the game really forces you to play a certain way the whole way through. What's different between this and some of the other Deception games is that in the New Game Plus, normally your traps are reset, but you get bonus money in the other playthroughs. This one, you keep the traps, and you still unlock traps for dealing with the various, for getting a specific ending. I think there's 4 total in this game. But yeah, it just comes across feeling bad. Like, I felt like I really couldn't do anything. Like, you couldn't trap create until chapter 6. You didn't really get vases until like chapter 12. Like, it was a really long time to go without a very basic trap, in my opinion. I mean, even in the other game, we had vase at like chapter 6 at the latest. Like, it did not take long. It's a very simple trap. Vase falls down, goes on their head, they walk forward X spaces. So it felt very limiting on a first playthrough, and I understand the intent is to play it over and over again. And I think that's where another problem comes into the game, is that I understand that they want you to then go through and experiment with the different traps, but because it starts you off with like really crappy traps for getting money, it's very easy to only get one trap a chapter. Like, for people that have seen my other playthrough, when we did Deception 2, towards the middle part of the game, we were unlocking 3 or more traps every single time we cleared chapter, because our combos were just so solid. Whereas in this game, it took a very long time to get all of our trap component pieces, so we were just kind of starved for points a majority of the game. So they did try to make this game a bit more advanced. There are a lot more room devices, and there are a lot more stages, so that is a positive thing to say towards the game's aspects. But again, it kind of goes back into yet another negative of the game, is that another big component of what I would say what makes Deception 2 a much superior game to this one, I'm just going to flat out state it, chat, I really do think Deception 2 is much better in almost every single way, is that this one has a more linear story. The trap progression feels super bad, and I will state that they try to mix it up a little bit by allowing you to put rings on a trap that alter how the trap works, and I didn't really like any of them. Like, there was like ones that let you control the trap, which is like really gimmicky, and I guess is kind of neat, but like, I won't spend that money on that kind of upgrade over getting a new trap, getting lower charge time, or getting better damage. Like, I don't want it, because I have such a point deficit already, I never felt an urge on the first playthrough to ever buy those. It's one thing if it was just like a toggle option and you swap between them, but it really isn't. So the whole concept of this game is you take a trap and you keep leveling it up, leveling it up. So Spring Floor might throw somebody 2 spaces, then it becomes 3. You could add an electric element to it, and it becomes an electric trap. And it's all really neat in theory until you think about, how do you create this? And the answer is a lot of points. So you either create a lot of really bad traps that are like borderline unusable, or you pump 3 or 4 major traps and you just focus on them for your moneymakers. So I feel like the game really did not inspire me to actually use the majority of the traps. Considering I got Magnet Wall so early, compared to everything else, it's like, why wouldn't I just max Magnet Wall into Vase? And then I could do anything for points at that point. Like, granted, there were some neat things where if you change the number of orbs on it, it impacts how it is used. Like, for example, Buzzsaw is super garbage at rank 1, can only hit a single enemy, moves them only a certain number of spaces backwards. But at max rank, it can hit multiple enemies, it can pierce them, and it forces them all the way to the wall, which is really fun for traps, or trap combos, I mean. But this game just didn't work for me overall, chat. I really miss in Deception 2 where you could let people go, and that would alter the kind of story path you would see. I miss the story choices. This game, there's like literally only 2 choices you make the whole game, maybe 3 depending on the ending. Whereas Deception 2, like every 3 or 4 chapters, we were given like a legitimate choice. And that did change, maybe not the ending route per se, but it did change the stage afterwards. And you would get things for like a no-kill bonus, or like an all-kill bonus, and no-hit bonus. I just feel like that game felt more complete. So if you're playing more of a pacifist route, it definitely worked for the most part. Whereas in this one, you kind of got to kill everybody, and That's about it. There's only the genocide route essentially. So I feel like even from like a story mechanic, this one did feel a lot weaker. I guess technically the cutscenes were better in this one. They're voiced in Japanese and subtitled, which is okay. I don't expect everything to be translated when it comes over in terms of like hiring English voice actors, etc. But I don't know. I just like Deception 2's story a bit more, even though it wasn't very deep, just because I feel like we had more control over it than this one. This one, it seems extremely linear, involving gathering pieces of a time machine kind of thing. But yeah, not really feeling it. I will say the music is decent. No, that's another thing I have to say. I do think the stage themes do work. I think they set the tone pretty well. I think some of the UI was cleaned up between 2 and 3, so things are a bit better laid out and it conveys more useful information whenever you're looking at a trap, like how far it hits other kind of characteristics. The game tries to tell us what the enemies are weak to, but towards the end of the game, either they just forgot or didn't feel it was important. But we definitely came across enemies that seem to have immunities not listed under their special abilities. So, like, it'll go like, here's a normal knight. Oh, wait, but he can block bombs. We just didn't tell you. And, like, Deception 2 had that to an extent, especially with the Ronin class, I think it was. That class was pretty heinous to fight in Deception 2. This one has an equivalency thereof. There's a lot more, I would say, complex combative enemies in this game. However, I do feel like they whiffed on the AI because they don't seem to react to magnet wall or other traps very often. Like, for example, they'll dodge an iron ball if you roll it down the stairs, but they won't react to a vacuum floor or a magnet wall or like a buzzsaw. They just don't see those traps for some reason in this game, which I'm pretty sure they did react to that in Deception 2. So that felt really awkward watching them not dodge traps. In fact, a big thing in Deception 2 is they wouldn't even enter rooms if they saw a trap going off. And in this one, they'll see it and then just walk into it. So the trade-off to that is that they are more combo prone in this game, which is just kind of BS. So for example, you could be fighting a character that causes earthquakes and another character that has a sort of trap dodging dash that does high damage. And if the earthquake guy hits the ground at any point you're in the room with the other character, and that other character could dash to you, you're going to be losing 95% of your health. The game tries to like circumvent that to a degree by giving you more mobility. Like there is a dodge roll in this game by tapping the L1 and R1 buttons rather than just rotating in place. But the problem with that is, and for anybody that's played anything like a Dark Souls, knows how bad it would be to have a dodge roll animation with no iframes. Chat, why didn't they give it iframes? It's so bad. I literally, I could be completely horizontal in the air and I'll still get clipped by like a horizontal swing. I'm like, seriously? It can't even dodge those? Like, you just, come on. It's one thing if it's a vertical swing and I'm like, you know, perpendicular to him or whatever, but it's like, I'm literally dodging around him and it's like, it doesn't work. Or I dodge backwards and it doesn't matter because he'll still clip your feet with a vertical strike, for example. Yeah, that dodge roll felt super bad for sure. I will say, the enemies in this game, like in terms of the villainy, I think were slightly more memorable in this game to some extent. But overall, very disappointed with the plot itself. I'm kind of on the fence, honestly, when it comes to streaming the rest of the game. I don't know if we'll just go through the rest of the endings. Because I do feel like it is kind of a chore to get through the beginning parts. And it's a shame, because I think there are some really interesting stage designs. And I like that it got away from the really bad gimmick of Deception 2, which was protecting the bomb, which was not my favorite thing to go on for like 8 chapters. That should have only been like a 2-chapter thing, to be real. Yeah, the final opponent was like super cartoonishly over the top, and it's kind of like a hit or miss whether or not you like that. But I want to touch base on one thing on why I think this game really didn't work for me overall. So we were talking about the progression earlier, where every time you start a new playthrough, you might get slightly more points to go towards trap creation, but you still have a free path. In this game, as I mentioned earlier, you are forced with certain base traps, but you'll get things called emblems, which add elements or status effects or something else to the overall trap. You got the rings, which for the most part were pretty useless. It was just either like a high damage up, a charge time down, or lots of automated ones, which I really did not like at all. But I will state, the fact that you can reduce charge time on traps really, really broke the game's balance. Like, we didn't even beat challenge mode to make charge time reduced to 0. Like, we didn't even do that, and we legit had so many infinites in this game because of the fact that you could reduce the charge time. Like, it's a really big deal if a trap takes, instead of 5 seconds, 3 seconds to charge, due to the fact that if you fling an enemy in the air, by the time they land, bounce, and start rising, that's usually about 4 seconds. So if you have 2 traps that have a 3-second or less cooldown, you have an infinite. And because you could reduce charge time roughly a little before the 3/4 mark of the game, that means everything can just infinite. So it kind of took the fun out of it to an extent, because there was no reason to really think about the room terrain all that much, because you could just pump up a magnet wall to reach 5 spaces. Then you could Hellfire, because you line them up against the wall, they spin in place, and you Iron Ball them, repeat, nothing they could do. The games sometimes force you to change traps based off of the enemy, but again, I feel like that's more to the detriment of the game, because of the fact that it rewards you so heavily for the first 80% of the game to just stick to basic traps and using them over and over, that when it finally requires you to use other traps, you could actually get to the end of the game and not have the right traps needed to beat the game. Like, just think about it, chat. Like, what would have happened if I didn't have, like, a Volt Javelin or a Buzzsaw, and I just stuck to Magnet Wall the whole game? I don't know if I would have been able to clear the final story chapters. Or could you imagine if I just had, like, bear traps and stuff leveled up and didn't have Hellfire? How unwinnable that endgame would be? And I think the big issue with that is they avoided that issue in Deception 2, because the more powerful traps required you to get traps on the way there, but that's not true in this game. So I feel like it's very possible to just end up with a series of traps. Like, if you want to make 4 Hellfire bombs, which is not a thing you could really do in the previous game or any other game, you could just end up with like 4 blast traps and go, wow, I really like this trap. And then you'll go, oh, hey, what does Flame Man do? Oh, he's immune to blast. Oh, I only have Rock, Pendulum, and Arrow Slit as my backup traps, none of which would really hurt him other than Rock because of his high defense. Oh, I guess I just lose. Do you know what I mean, chat? Like, I think because they made it so freeform, it actually is a big issue. Like, we kind of got lucky in that sense with the first playthrough to avoid that. So let me think. Is there anything else we didn't cover? We talked about the music. We talked a little bit about the characters in the story. I think it is interesting that they offered more varieties of traps, but I think because it costs so many points, unless you're really willing to play through all 3 additional endings after you get your first ending, I don't think you would use the majority of the traps. Like, it goes hundreds of traps. We beat the game with just 12. I'm pretty sure. Like, we barely did a full loadout. Right, chat? We had, like, 1 push wall, 1 arrow slit, magnet wall, technically got vacuum floor, two floor tile ones, Hellfire, bear trap, buzzsaw, ceiling buzzsaw, Iron Ball. I think that was it. I don't think we had more traps than that. Like, we were kind of messing around on the final chapter a little bit, but yeah, very much we have less traps comparatively. In a Deception 2 playthrough, we would have had at that point probably about 20 at the 3/4 mark. So we would have had a lot more variety. Yeah, I can't think of anything else that we're missing. And we had duplicates for a couples. as I said before, which the game lets you do. So I don't know, chat. I will say, to me, this is probably, I'm not gonna say this is the most disappointing game of the year, but in terms of Spooktober, I felt very let down, in particular by the challenge mode. I just feel like if I'm gonna play a Deception game, I'm either gonna play the one that's after this one, or I'm gonna play Deception 2. Because I feel like a lot of issues of either not having plot choices or having better control over traps are either resolved by going back to 2 or by going to the next game in the series. So I'll think about what we're gonna do from the stream standpoint, but I think from the review standpoint, I don't really have too much else to add. So chat, if you want to provide your final thoughts to the viewers, because I'm sure many of you have never seen the game before, it's kind of a more obscure series. I will state, I do think that they tried to do more things, and I view this as very experimental. I just don't think it worked for me. At least it gives hope for the next one, something like that, chat. So, I don't know. I don't know where we're gonna see with ourselves here. I might just move on, I think. I originally was intended to go through it, but honestly, those final, like, 6 story chapters were not really fun to play through. So, like, even if we get a lot of arc to make more traps, I don't feel myself doing a new game plus. Like, Deception 2... it's kind of like starting the game over, but getting a little bit of a bonus because you get like another trap that's like, oh, this one's so cool, I want to try to use it because I get it for free. Well, free-ish. But, I don't feel that same wonderment, I would say, with this game. Not saying I didn't hate this one, but it definitely feels inferior to the previous one. There were some like good ideas, but poor execution. I think good ideas, but poor execution is a perfect example of that. Like, there's a lot of things where if they just cleaned it up a little bit, it would have been a lot more fun. And I think because they allow you to have so many options, a lot of those options are just booty garbage, and you just wasted your trap points, and then you just feel kind of frustrated. Like, I do like the idea of powering up the trap with the orbs. That I was okay with. I feel like once you purchase the orbs, you should be able to slide it up and down. It should not cost you money to swap it. It just, I don't know. Just many things I had misgivings on, for sure. But yeah, I feel like this one's not really going to hold a special place in my heart. Like, 2, I will always go back and replay. I really love that game. And I think Trapped is also pretty good for what it is. Technically, it's like Deception 3.5 if you want to think about it, because it's not technically Deception 4, because there is a Deception 4 in the series. But I think we'll leave it here for now, chat. So don't have anything else to say for the review. So if you've been watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching, and hope to see you again next time.